What is going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, we're having a look at Gukesh D's latest and greatest game, which features not just one rook sacrifice, but two rook sacrifices in round number 12 of the 2025 Tata Steel Chess Tournament. Let's dive right in. All right, in the game, Jordan Van Foreest opens 1d4, and Gukesh D, does he go one knight f6, the Indian defense? No, he does not. In this game, he goes 1d5. Then we have 2c4, the Queen's Gambit opening on the board. And now what will Gukesh do? Of course, the main lines here are d takes c4, c6, and e6. And sure enough, in this game, e6 is the move, the good old-fashioned Queen's Gambit declined. Now here, Jordan Van Foreest, knight to c3, intending c takes d5, trying to get a good version of a Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation. And here, Gukesh, instead of playing the main move, knight f6, in this position, he goes for the other idea, that is bishop to e7. Now, this is a very interesting move. The idea behind it, you are trying to gain control of that g5 square and stop a bishop g5 idea from white. All right, Jordan Van Foreest, c takes d5 is the move, then e takes d5, and now we have that famous Carlsbad pawn structure in the center of the board where black does not have the e pawn and white does not have the c pawn. And now here, of course, bishop g5 is not possible as black does control that square. Therefore, instead, the next best thing is bishop f4, and this is also a decent square for the bishop. Now here, c6 is the move, bolstering d5. So far, very standard stuff. We have e3 and then bishop f5. And now here, the main move for white, if he wants to fight for an opening advantage at all costs, is the move g4. That is the maximalist move in this position, trying to drive back that bishop. And typically, it will go to e6, and from there, the game does go on. But instead of that, in this game, here, Jordan Van Foreest does go knight g to e2. Also a very playable move. The idea being the knight wants to go to g3, where it does put pressure on the bishop on f5. Now here, black goes knight d7. Interesting choice. And now here, Jordan Van Foreest. I expected, say, knight g3 or maybe h4, something like that, something active on the queen side, gaining space. But no, he does not do any of those moves. Instead, rook to c1 was played in the game. And what is the idea behind this rook move? Well, obviously, white is eyeing the c file. Maybe he's intending the minority attack with the moves a3, b4, and b5. But honestly, this move, rook c1, is a little bit dubious. It's just not that important in this position. Again, you had to keep your development going on the king side with moves like knight g3 or maybe h4 instead. Now here, black has the option of gaining space on the king side immediately and trying to punish white for his mistake with the move g5. This move would be incredibly active, driving back that bishop on f4. But instead, here, Gukesh, sticking to his guns, he just goes knight g to f6, a very typical developing move. And again, he is setting up short castles on the king side. All right, now, Jordan Van Foreest, knight g3, putting pressure on the bishop. Of course, that bishop is hanging. You don't want to lose it. Therefore, bishop g6 played in the game, and that is a decent square for the bishop. Now we have h4, the alpha 0 advance, intending h5 if black allows it, but here black does not allow it. He goes h5 himself. How cute. The alpha 0 h pawns are touching. Now we have bishop e2, white exerting a little more pressure on that pawn on h5, and very importantly, he is temporarily stopping the move short castles from black. Here, if black were to short castle, he would lose the pawn on h5 as that pawn is being attacked 1, 2, 3 times and only defended 1, 2, 3 times. And if you castle, the rook no longer defends h5, and that means white can pick it up immediately as he has more attackers than defenders. So here, black cannot short castle in this position. Instead, in the game here, Gukesh, he goes queen b6, immediately exerting pressure on the pawn on b2. However, I do want to point out, this move as well is a little bit dubious as white can actually ignore the pawn entirely and just go short castles, intending bishop d3. For example, short castles is the strongest move here, and if black takes on b2, then you just go bishop d3, again continuing the attack, and it turns out you have more than sufficient compensation for that pawn. Instead, in the game, queen d2 played by Jordan Van Foreest, simply defending that pawn on b2, and this is not a bad move either, but it's a little bit less strong than short castles instead. All right, now here, black, what is he going to do? Well, the main moves for here, black, Well, the main moves for black in this position include short castles and a5. Instead, though, in the game, Gukesh, being a very active player, as all of these Indian super grandmasters are, he goes knight g4, immediately trying to do something weird on the king side. What is the idea behind this move? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Black is exerting a little bit of pressure on that pawn on h4. Perhaps it was intended to stop short castles, but overall, this move, knight g4, looking at least a little bit awkward. All right, now here, turns out white can punish this move one of two ways. One, you can just take on g4 immediately, or you can go for the central break, e4. That would also be very, very strong. Instead, in the game, bishop g5 played, offering the trade of those dark squared bishops. But will black go for it? No, he will not. He goes bishop d6, eyeing the knight on g3. Now Gukesh is threatening bishop takes g3. That would permanently damage white's pawn structure after bishop takes and then f takes g3. With that in mind here, Jordan Van Foreest, bishop f4 is the move, once again offering the bishop trade, and once again Gukesh, he declines. Bishop e7. Now we have bishop g5 one more time, and this is Jordan Van Foreest essentially offering a draw on the spot. If Gukesh wants it, he would go bishop d6, white goes bishop f4, black goes bishop e7, white goes bishop g5, and so on, and that would effectively be a draw on the spot. Now instead, of course, Gukesh, he's playing for a win. He goes queen d8, retreating his queen and putting a little more pressure on that bishop on g5. Now the idea is, if white takes on e7, black recaptures with the queen, and he even has the option of long castling then, so black retains a lot of different possibilities. Now instead, f3 played in the game, driving back that knight. Then we have knight g to f6, and finally short castles. So with that knight no longer on g4, and with the bishop no longer pressuring h4, white does have the option of castling. But now here, of course, Gukesh, he has the option of castling himself, but instead he plays the very provocative move knight to h7, retreating his knight, and once again trying to put more pressure on that bishop on g5. And again, if white takes on e7, black will recapture with the queen, and again he will have the option of long castling, trying to get an opposite sides castling scenario. All right, here. Turns out white has a very powerful way to punish this move by Gukesh. It is the move f4. This move is just insane. The idea being, if black goes f6, trying to trap that bishop on g5, white goes f5, putting pressure on the bishop on g6 and giving his bishop a retreat square on f4 if it needs it. That is a crazy line. You can investigate that on your own if you want to. Instead, in the game, bishop takes e7 played, then queen takes e7, and here it turns out white has a very hard time defending that pawn on h4. In fact, it's almost impossible to defend it right now in this position. The only move that would defend it is the move knight g4, but of course that loses the knight on the spot. So with that in mind, what should white be doing here about that pawn? Well, it turns out the best way to defend it is king to f2, intending rook h1 next. That is the top computer line here. However, instead, in the game, Jordan Van Foreest plays the move f4, giving up that pawn on h4, and here Gukesh, he just gobbles it up. Queen takes h4, gobbling up the pawn, pressuring the knight on g3, and this is where the game gets completely insane. All right, white obviously has to do something about that knight on g3. You cannot just lose the knight against Gukesh. So with that in mind, queen to e1 played in the game, defending g3. But here, Gukesh, f5, a very precise move, locking down the center of the board. Now white has virtually no pawn breaks in the center or on the king side. Of course, there is still that pawn on h5, and here Jordan Van Foreest finds a very precise move. Knight takes h5. What is the idea? You open up the discovered attack on the queen on h4. The point being, if you take the bishop, white takes the queen, and you win the queen. On the other hand, if you take on h5 with the queen, then of course, white again wins the queen. Therefore, black here has no choice but to retreat the queen entirely. Queen e7 played in the game, and that means Jordan Van Foreest does win win back that pawn on h5 immediately. Now, both sides do not have the pawn on the h-file. However, overall, that does favor black, as of course, black has the option of castling long here, and black will be attacking on the king side using the open h-file. All right, now here, Jordan Van Foreest, bishop f3 is the move. Then bishop takes h5, bishop takes, and then very interestingly, I thought here Gukesh would go king to d8, intending perhaps king c7, but instead, king f8 played in the game. Here he's keeping his king sort of in the center, sort of on the king side. The point being, the rook on h8 is very active already on the open h-file, and maybe he'll find some way to activate the other rook on a8 and get it into the game. All right, now here, white, knight d1 is the move, trying to find a better square for the knight, perhaps intending knight f2, then d3, then e5, and so on. Now, knight b6 played in the game. Gukesh doing the exact same thing. Number one, freeing up the rook on a8 to come into the game, and beyond that, maybe intending knight c8 to d6 and then c4 or e4. It's a very typical rerouting process for that knight in the Queen's Gambit decline exchange variation. Now white, bishop g6, putting pressure on that knight on h7, queen to e6, returning the favor, returning fire on that bishop. Now we have queen b4, hitting the king on f8. Where is the king going to go? It turns out it is going to the g8 square. King g8, played by Gukesh, getting his king out of fire, and of course, the king on g8 and the rook on h8 makes a very strange impression, but of course, that rook will be very active on the h-file sooner or later. Now here, white does trade on h7. Bishop takes h7, rook takes, activating the rook again on the open h-file, and now rook to f3. Jordan Van Foreest, he knows you cannot allow black to go, say, queen to h6 unopposed, threatening queen h1. Therefore, rook f3 is the move. The point being, if black goes queen h6, then you can go rook h3 and you are defending. Now, Gukesh, rook to e8 is the move. Perhaps intending queen g6, then rook e6, finding a way to bring the rook into the game. Then we have knight f2, intending again knight d3, then e5, most likely, knight c4 played by Gukesh, and now sure enough, knight d3. All right, this is a very critical point in this middle game. Both sides have mostly activated all of their pieces, and how does Gukesh want to continue the attack? Of course, the pawn on b7 is currently hanging. White has the option of taking it with his queen if Gukesh does not defend. So what should Gukesh be doing here to continue the attack / defend that pawn on b7? Well, it turns out the two strongest moves here are queen to h6 and a5, attacking the queen and just begging white to take on b7. Now, instead of those options, in the game, rook to h4 was played, with the idea being you bring your rook out to the 4th rank, intending queen h6 with the queen behind the rook. Therefore, if white does go rook h3, that will not be a very significant threat later in the game. Now here, white has the option of taking on b7, but instead of that, if I can draw arrows correctly, but instead of that, here, white plays the move, knight to e5, jumping in with the knight to the very strong e5 square. Of course, that is exactly where that knight belongs. Now here, Gukesh, b5 is the move, clamping down on the queen side, clamping down on that knight on c4. Now, of course, if white takes on c4, white does not win a pawn. For example, here, white was threatening just knight takes c4, d takes, then queen takes with an excellent game. So b5 defends the knight, and it also defends the pawn on b7, which is now on b5. However, I do want to point out once again, this move was not completely necessary. Instead, queen to h6, continuing the attack ASAP, it turns out was a little bit stronger. Instead, b5 played in the game. Very understandable. Now we have queen to c5, pressuring c6 with the queen and the knight. What is Gukesh going to do about it? Well, he ignores the pawn completely, and he just continues his attack with the move queen to h6. You gotta love it. All right, now here, Jordan Van Foreest, king f2, getting his king off the G-file away from G1, where it was being exposed to rook H1 ideas. Now we have rook E6, the rook lift on the 6th rank. The idea being the rook is now attacking, potentially heading to G6 or H6, and defending that pawn on C6. All right, now here, in this position, Jordan Van Foreest, he just sets the board on fire with a move that is so incredibly good. I cannot understand the full depth of the idea, even with Stockfish right in front of me. In this position, you know what? Good time for a puzzle. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the unthinkable move by Jordan Van Foreest right here in this position. And while you're at it, go and smash that YouTube like button for more videos just like this one. All right, here, Jordan Van Foreest. He plays the move, rook takes c4. I mean, that is as close as you're ever going to get to a clean sacrifice of the rook, giving it up just for the knight, the rook sacrifice, exchange sacrifice, whatever you want to call it. Now, what is the idea behind this move? I'm going to be honest. I studied this move extensively. I still cannot fully figure out why white did this. According to the engine, it is probably the strongest move here. You just give up the rook for the knight. And I guess the idea being that knight was simply too active and your rook wasn't doing a whole lot on c1. And now the pawn on a7 is very, very weak. But again, overall, this move makes a very strange impression to me. All right, here, the strongest move for black is b takes c4, recapturing towards the center. But instead, d takes c4 played in the game. Jordan Van Foreest already forcing out a little bit of a mistake by Gukesh. Now we have queen takes a7, then queen to f6. The queen getting back to the center of the board where it can defend. And now here, white, it turns out his best move is simply a4, the alpha 0 advance. The point being, you are threatening not to take on b5, but to go a5, trying to get a pass pawn as soon as possible. And if black does take on a4, then he permanently destroys his own pawn structure after b takes a4, then queen takes. So overall, a4 would be an incredibly strong move right here in this position. Instead, in the game, rook g3 played, pressuring g7 with the rook and the queen. Now the queen is tied to the defense of the g7 pawn. If it moves to, I don't know, say d8, then you lose on the spot to queen takes g7 checkmate. Therefore, Gukesh, he has to keep that in mind. All right, rook h1 played in the game, activating the rook on the first rank of white. You don't see that every day. Now here, white, knight d7 hits the queen. The queen has to go somewhere. Where is it going to go? Queen d8 played. Of course, with that knight on d7, queen takes g7 is not threatening checkmate yet. So here, Jordan Van Foreest, 95, dropping the knight back, once again threatening checkmate, the audacity of this man. And here we do have some sort of a draw offer in the books. For example, if black wanted to, he could just repeat moves. For example, if black wanted to, if Gukesh wanted it, he could just go queen f6, inviting knight d7, then queen d8, knight e5, and so on. And once again, it would be a draw. But once again, Gukesh, he declines the draw offer, the tacit implied draw offer, and he goes rook to e7. This is how you know Gukesh is playing for a win at all costs against his low-rated opponent, even as black. You gotta love it. Now, the benefit of this move, the rook attacks the queen on a7 and defends the pawn on g7 at the exact same time. What is white going to do about it? In the game, queen to a6 was played, but it turns out queen to a3 was the stronger move, getting the queen all the way back to the third rank and pressuring that rook on e7. Instead, queen a6 played, pressuring c6, a very logical looking move, but here Gukesh, he returns the favor with an absolutely diabolical move that is so good. I mean, I can't even put it into words. And again, if you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the completely mind-boggling, insane move by Gukesh right here in this position. And of course, if you saw the intro, you know what's happening. Here, Gukesh, he returns the rook sacrifice. Rook takes e5, the counter rook / exchange sacrifice. What is the idea? If white takes back with the d pawn, then the queen comes flying down the board on the newly opened d file, and black would be doing excellent. On the other hand, if you take with the f pawn, that is what's played in the game. Jordan Van Foreest being very clever, saying, I'm going to recapture towards the center, keeping the d file closed. And now, Gukesh, what is your big idea? Well, Gukesh, he shows it immediately with the move f4, the pawn sacrifice. The point being, you are deflecting the defense of the pawn on d4. If white takes on f4, then queen takes d4 is the move, immediately flying in with the queen. All right, Jordan Van Foreest, he tries to defend rook h3, is the move, attacking the rook on h1. Therefore, rook takes h3 is virtually forced, but first, before doing that, we have the move f takes e4, capturing with check, giving white not even a chance to capture on h1 yet. All right, white, king to e2 is the move, and here, Gukesh, he does not take on h3, instead, rook to b1 is the move, flying over with the rook again, pressuring b2. Gukesh, this guy is playing for a win no matter what. But Jordan Van Foreest, he sees the free pawn on c6 and he takes it. Queen takes c6 is the move. Now, of course, rook takes b2 happens immediately, pressuring the king, eyeing the pawn on g2 behind the king. Where is the king going to go? In the game, king to f3 was chosen. Now, queen to f8 again hits that king on f3. Now we have the beginnings of a king march by Jordan Van Foreest. King e4. He has no choice. The king has to march forward into the game. Now we have rook f2 flying over with the rook. Queen to e6 hits the king on g8. And now it turns out there is no easy way to block the check. It turns out the strongest move here is queen to f7. But of course, that would offer a draw with the moves queen c8, queen f8, queen e6, queen f7, and so on. And of course, Gukesh, he's shown already he is not playing for a draw in this game. Therefore, instead, rook to f7 was played, retreating the rook and blocking the attack. Now we have the mini fortress with the queen, the rook, and the pawn all blocking the black king on g8. And what is white going to do about it? Well, he ignores it for now and just gobbles up that free pawn on e3. Rook takes e3 is the move, a perfectly fine choice, but I do want to point out, instead of that, the strongest move here was queen to g6, threatening checkmate once again on h7. That would have been a very difficult move to counter. Instead, in the game, rook takes e3 chosen. Then we have queen to a8 check, hitting the king once again. Now d5 blocks the check, but of course, the pawn on the a2 square is hanging, and here, Gukesh, he just gobbles it up. Queen takes a2 is the move. And here, Jordan Van Foreest, he's been trying literally all game to get a draw out of Gukesh, and here, he finally forces it. There is simply no choice. Queen to c8 check hits the king. Now, very importantly, if you go to h7, then rook h3 is just nasty. So with that in mind here, rook f8 played. Now, queen to e6. Again, if the king moves to the h-file, then rook h1 is absolutely deadly. Therefore, rook f7 is forced. And here, queen c8, and both players in this position do agree to a draw, and here's why. It is a threefold draw by repetition after rook f8, queen e6, rook f7, queen c8, and so on. It would be a draw anyway, so for that reason, way back, I believe roughly right here, both players did agree to a draw. Wow, what a game between Jordan Van Foreest and Gukesh D, the current reigning world champion, in round number 12 of the 2025 Tata Steel Chess Tournament. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, comment down below what you thought of this completely insane game featuring 2 rook sacrifices by Jordan Van Foreest, and then later in the game, where was it? That's right, by Gukesh D right here. I mean, talk about an exciting game. It did end in a draw, but despite that, really an incredible game. So comment down below what you thought of this game, especially those 2 rook sacrifices. I'm very curious what you thought of them. And especially, I'm going to be honest, this first one right here, 34 rook takes c4. If you're a kibitzer, if you like analyzing positions, analyze this position and try to tell me why the heck white played this and why the heck the computer likes it so much. I'm going to be honest. Even after looking at it with the engine, I simply cannot understand this move. It is just completely insane to me, but it works out for some reason. So if you know why, comment down below and enlighten me. Tell me why this move actually made sense. And if you want to see more action by Gukesh, check out this video right here, where I cover yet another one of Gukesh D's latest and greatest games from the 2025 Tata Steel Chess Tournament. So if you like Gukesh chess games, check that video out, and I'll see you in the next video.